Chapter 1. The Sick Day. By noon, Seth Jones knew he shouldn't still be at work. The warehouse lights felt too bright, like needles pressing into his eyes. Every sound, forklifts beeping, pallets scraping concrete, coworkers shouting over machinery, echoed inside his skull as if his head were hollow. Sweat clung to the back of his neck, even though the air conditioning blasted cold overhead. His throat burned, his joints ached, and the nausea rolling through his stomach came in slow, dangerous waves. "You look like hell, man," Carlos said, pausing beside Seth's workstation with a clipboard tucked under his arm. "You good?" Seth forced a weak smile. "Yeah, just didn't sleep much." Carlos raised an eyebrow. "You're swaying." Seth hadn't realized he was. He tightened his grip on the metal shelving to steady himself. The world tilted slightly, then corrected. "I'm fine," he insisted, but his voice came out hoarse, thin. Carlos didn't look convinced. "Go home. Seriously, we're not curing cancer here. Inventory can wait." Normally, Seth would have argued. He prided himself on reliability, on being the guy who showed up no matter what. But today his body was staging a full revolt. Even standing upright felt like work. "Yeah," he muttered after a moment. "Maybe you're right." By 12:30 he was in his car, the heater blowing warm air onto his freezing hands despite the mild weather outside. His muscles shivered uncontrollably. He kept swallowing against the raw ache in his throat, wishing he'd grabbed water before leaving. The drive home blurred past in patches of traffic lights and sunlight reflecting off windshields. Twice he had to blink hard to refocus on the road. His thoughts drifted strangely, snippets of unfinished inventory reports, Robbie's science project from last week, Natalie reminding him to buy milk. Home, bed, silence. That was all he wanted. When he finally pulled into the driveway, relief washed over him so intensely he had to sit there for a moment before getting out. The house looked the same as always, 2 stories, pale siding, flower beds Natalie kept obsessively neat. Normal. Safe. He grabbed his bag and walked inside. The moment he stepped through the door, something felt off. It wasn't anything obvious. The house smelled faintly of lemon cleaner like it always did. Sunlight filtered through the living room curtains. The television murmured softly somewhere deeper inside. But there was a tension in the air, like the atmosphere before a thunderstorm. "Natalie," he called. Footsteps approached quickly. His wife appeared from the kitchen doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Her blonde hair was tied back in a loose ponytail, and she wore leggings and one of his old college t-shirts. "Seth." Her eyes widened. "What are you doing home?" "Flu, I think," he said, dropping his bag near the stairs. "Felt awful. Carlos told me to go." "Oh." She paused, just a fraction too long. "Okay. Yeah, that makes sense." He leaned in to kiss her cheek, but she turned slightly, making it awkward. Not a full avoidance, but enough for him to notice. "You okay?" he asked. "Of course," she said quickly. "Just surprised. You never come home early." From the kitchen, a chair scraped. Dolores appeared, her thin frame moving with deliberate slowness. Natalie's mother had been staying with them for a few weeks. Temporary, Natalie had said, though Seth wasn't sure how temporary it really was. Dolores' sharp eyes scanned him from head to toe. "You look sick," she said flatly. "Thanks," Seth muttered. "You shouldn't bring illness into the house," she added. Natalie shot her a look. "Mom, I'm just saying," Dolores continued calmly. "We have routines." Seth didn't have the energy to respond. "Where's Robbie?" "At a play date," Natalie said quickly. "Ethan's house. Remember? I told you yesterday, right?" Maybe she had. His brain felt stuffed with cotton. "Yeah, okay. You should go lie down," she said, already guiding him toward the stairs. "I'll bring you soup later." Her hand on his arm felt gentle, but there was a subtle urgency in the way she moved him along, like she wanted him upstairs as fast as possible. "I can manage," he said, though he let her steer him anyway. Dolores watched from the hallway, her expression unreadable. Upstairs, the bedroom felt blessedly dim. Seth kicked off his shoes and collapsed onto the bed, groaning as his muscles relaxed against the mattress. His head throbbed in steady pulses. Natalie pulled the blanket over him. "Try to sleep." "Yeah," he murmured. She lingered for a second, then left, closing the door behind her. Silence settled. For a few minutes, Seth drifted in and out of shallow sleep. Fever dreams flickered, warehouse aisles stretching endlessly, Robbie calling his name from somewhere he couldn't reach. Then he heard it, a faint scratching sound. His eyes opened. He lay still, listening. Scratch, scratch, scratch. It was coming from the wall behind the headboard. He frowned, pushing himself up slightly. Maybe tree branches outside? But the window was on the opposite wall. Scratch, scratch. He swung his legs off the bed and pressed his palm against the drywall. The vibration was subtle, but real. Natalie, he called hoarsely. Footsteps came quickly again. She opened the door halfway. What? There's something in the wall, he said. You hear that? She paused, listening. The scratching continued faintly. Oh, yeah, she said after a second. It's probably rats. Rats? Yeah, I've been hearing it for weeks. She shrugged casually. We'll call pest control or something. Weeks? Why didn't you tell me? He asked. I forgot, she said. It's not a big deal. Behind her, Seth noticed Dolores standing in the hallway again, watching. Not curious, not concerned, just watching. The scratching continued. Natalie smiled reassuringly. Go back to sleep. You need rest. She closed the door before he could respond. Seth lay back, down slowly, staring at the ceiling. Rats, he told himself. Old houses had them sometimes. Pipes shifted, wood settled. Normal explanations. But as he closed his eyes again, the sound came back, steady, deliberate. Scratch, scratch, scratch. His stomach tightened. Because the rhythm wasn't random. It wasn't frantic like an animal trying to escape. It sounded almost intentional. The scratching continued, too rhythmic to be an animal. Chapter 2. The sound behind the wall. Seth lay frozen on the bed, staring at the wall behind the headboard. Scratch, scratch, scratch. The sound hadn't stopped. If anything, it had become clearer, more distinct. His fever made everything feel unreal. The room slightly tilted, his skin too hot, the air too thick. But the noise cut through the haze with sharp clarity. He pushed himself upright again, heart beginning to beat faster. Okay, he muttered to himself. It's rats. He swung his legs over the side of the bed and stood. The floor felt cold under his feet, grounding him. Slowly, he stepped closer to the wall and placed his palm flat against it. The scratching paused. Seth frowned, then tapped. He jerked his hand back like he'd touched something hot. That wasn't scratching. That was a knock. A faint one. Weak, but unmistakable. His pulse spiked. No, he whispered, shaking his head. No, that's tap. Tap. 2 taps this time. Deliberate. Seth's mouth went dry. He leaned closer, pressing his ear against the drywall. For a moment, there was nothing except the pounding of his own heartbeat echoing in his skull. Then he heard it. Movement. Not scurrying. Not scratching claws. Shifting. Something sliding against wood. And beneath it, a sound that made the blood drain from his face. Breathing. Very faint. Very weak. But human. He stumbled backward, nearly losing his balance. A wave of dizziness crashed over him, but adrenaline cut through the fever fog like a knife. Natalie, he shouted. Footsteps pounded up the stairs immediately. The bedroom door flew open. What? She said, breathless. There's something in the wall, he said. His voice sounded wrong, tight, strained. I heard knocking. Her expression flickered, just for a second. Then she forced a laugh. Seth, you're sick. You probably imagined I didn't imagine it, he snapped. From the hallway, Dolores appeared again, moving slower this time, her eyes sharp and focused. What's going on? She asked calmly. He thinks there's something in the wall, Natalie said quickly. I told him it's rats. It's not rats, Seth said, pointing. There's breathing. I heard breathing. Dolores tilted her head slightly, studying him like he was a specimen under glass. You have a fever, she said. Hallucinations are common. I'm not hallucinating. Silence stretched. Then, scratch, tap, the sound came again. Natalie's shoulders stiffened almost imperceptibly. Seth saw it, and in that moment, something inside him shifted. Fear. Cold, sharp fear. Move, he said, stepping past her. Where are you going? She asked. Garage. Seth, but he was already heading down the stairs, his legs moving faster than his thoughts. His heart pounded so hard he could feel it in his throat. Behind him, he heard Natalie's footsteps rushing to catch up. "Seth, stop," she said. "You're overreacting." He reached the garage door and yanked it open. The smell of motor oil and sawdust filled his nose. He scanned the tool wall. There, the sledgehammer hung on its hook. Heavy steel head, worn wooden handle. He grabbed it. Natalie's hand clamped onto his arm. "What you doing?" "I'm opening the wall." "No," she said immediately. Too quickly, too forcefully. "You're not smashing our house because you heard a noise." "There's something in there," he said. "I know it. It's rats." "Then we'll see rats." Her grip tightened. "You're sick. You need to lie down." He pulled his arm free. "I heard knocking," he said, his voice low now. "Dangerous." "Knocking, Natalie." For a moment, they just stared at each other. Then Dolores spoke from behind them. "If it will calm him," she said smoothly, "let him look." Seth turned. She stood in the doorway between the kitchen and garage, hands folded neatly in front of her. Her face was composed, almost serene, but there was something in her eyes, something he couldn't place. Not worry, not confusion, something else, something that made his stomach twist. Natalie hesitated. "Mom, it's just drywall," Dolores said. "It could be repaired." The words sounded reasonable, but the tone underneath them wasn't. Seth didn't wait for more argument. He turned and marched back toward the stairs, sledgehammer in hand. Natalie followed, her voice rising. "Seth, this is ridiculous. You're going to regret this. Stop." He ignored her. Each step up the stairs felt heavier than the last, not from the hammer, but from the growing dread curling inside his chest. What if he was wrong? What if he smashed the wall and found nothing? But what if he didn't? And something was there. By the time he reached the bedroom, his hands were shaking. The scratching had started again. Louder now, more frantic. Scratch, scratch, tap. He stepped inside. Natalie hovered in the doorway behind him. Dolores stood further back in the hall, watching silently. Seth approached the wall. He pressed his ear against it one last time. Movement, breathing, a faint whimper. His entire body went cold. Without another word, he stepped back, lifted the sledgehammer over his shoulder, and swung. The impact exploded through the room with a deafening crack. Drywall shattered inward. Dust burst into the air like smoke. Natalie screamed. Chunks of plaster rained onto the floor. Seth coughed, waving dust away from his face as a jagged hole opened in the wall between the studs. Darkness filled the cavity. For a split second, everything was still. Then, something moved inside the darkness. Chapter 3, The Impossible Discovery. For a moment after the impact, Seth couldn't hear anything except the ringing in his own ears. Dust floated through the air in pale clouds, catching the afternoon sunlight that streamed through the bedroom window. Bits of drywall crumbled from the jagged hole he'd smashed open, falling in soft taps onto the floor. Behind him, Natalie was still screaming. "What did you do?" "Seth, what did you?" Her voice faded into the background, because Seth was staring into the wall, and his brain refused to understand what his eyes were seeing. At first, all he registered was darkness between the studs, insulation torn away, empty space where nothing should have been. Then something shifted, a small movement, a flinch, and suddenly the darkness had shape. A face. His son's face. "Robbie?" The word came out like air leaking from a punctured lung. Robbie blinked against the light pouring through the hole. His eyes looked enormous in his thin, dirty face. Tear tracks had carved pale lines through the grime on his cheeks. His lips were cracked, dry, partially covered by gray duct tape. For a split second, Seth thought he was hallucinating. Fever. Delirium. This couldn't be real. But Robbie whimpered, a weak, broken sound, and reality slammed into Seth like a freight train. "Oh my God," Seth choked. He dropped the sledgehammer. It hit the floor with a heavy thud he barely heard. "Robbie!" He lunged forward, grabbing the broken drywall edges with his hands, ignoring the sharp pieces cutting into his palms. He tore more of the wall open in frantic jerks, widening the hole enough to reach inside. Natalie's voice behind him had gone silent. Dolores hadn't said anything at all. Seth didn't notice. All he saw was his son. Robbie's arms were stretched outward, wrists secured to the wooden studs with thick white zip ties. More restraints bound his ankles. His clothes, what was left of them, were filthy, stained, hanging loose on his too thin frame. He looked smaller, fragile, like something that had been hidden away too long. "Oh God, buddy, oh God." Seth's hands shook violently as he reached inside. "I've got you. I've got you." Robbie flinched when Seth touched him. That nearly broke him. "It's me," Seth said quickly, voice cracking. "It's Daddy. You're safe. I'm here." Robbie's eyes focused slowly, recognition dawning through exhaustion. A strangled sob escaped him. Seth ripped the duct tape from his mouth. Robbie gasped in a ragged breath that sounded painful. "Daddy," he croaked. I know. Seth's vision blurred with tears. "I'm getting you out. Hold on." The zip ties were tight, too tight. Plastic dug into Robbie's skin, leaving deep red grooves. Seth fumbled with them, his hands clumsy from panic. "Natalie," he shouted over his shoulder. "Scissors. Knife. Something." No answer. He didn't turn around. He didn't want to see her face. Instead, he grabbed the broken edge of a stud and used it like leverage, twisting the plastic with brute force. The tie snapped with a sharp crack. Robbie whimpered again. I'm sorry, Seth murmured, working faster. Almost done. One by one, he broke the restraints. When the last one gave way, Robbie's body sagged forward. Seth caught him immediately, pulling him out of the wall and into his arms. The weight shocked him. Robbie felt so light. Too light. Seth dropped to his knees on the floor, clutching his son against his chest. I've got you, he whispered desperately. I've got you. You're okay. Robbie clung to his shirt with weak fingers. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Robbie's voice came again, barely audible. Daddy, yeah, buddy. Robbie's body trembled. I'm not alone in here. Seth froze. What? Robbie swallowed hard, his eyes filling with tears again. Looked down. A cold sensation crept up Seth's spine. Slowly, almost unwillingly, he turned his head back toward the hole in the wall. Dust still drifted in the air. The interior space stretched deeper than he'd expected, farther down between the studs into the hollow structure of the house. At first, he didn't understand what he was seeing. Shapes, pale shapes against the darkness. Then his eyes adjusted, and the world stopped. Bones, small bones, a skull no bigger than a grapefruit, tiny ribs, a fragile arm curled inward like it had once been trying to protect itself. Next to it, another. Two small skeletons lying side by side in the darkness of the wall cavity. Children. Seth's breath left his body in a silent gasp. His mind refused to connect the image with reality. This wasn't possible. This wasn't happening. Houses didn't contain skeletons. Walls didn't hide dead children. But they were there. Real. Undeniable. Years of dust coated them. Time had turned them into something almost delicate, like artifacts from an ancient grave. Behind him, he heard movement. Dolores stepping closer. Still silent. Still calm. And in that moment, staring into the darkness, holding his shaking son while the remains of other children lay hidden inside his home, Seth felt something inside his soul fracture. Because this wasn't an accident. This wasn't new. This horror had been here, waiting, for years. Seth realizes this horror has existed for years. Chapter 4, The Confession. For several seconds, the room existed in complete silence. Seth knelt on the bedroom floor. Robbie clutched tightly against his chest, his eyes still locked on the dark cavity inside the wall. The skeletons didn't move. They didn't need to. Their presence alone felt louder than any scream. Behind him, footsteps approached slowly. Measured. Unhurried. Dolores. Seth didn't turn around immediately. He didn't trust himself to move. His body felt like it had been drained of blood, replaced with ice and electricity. How long? He whispered hoarsely. The question barely made it out of his throat. Dolores stopped a few feet behind him. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm. Robbie has been in there for 3 months. The words didn't make sense. 3 months. 3 months? Seth blinked rapidly, tried to process it. That's not. His voice cracked. That's not possible. He's been at school. Soccer practice. Birthday parties. No. Dolores said gently. He hasn't. Seth slowly turned his head. Dolores stood with her hands folded neatly in front of her, her posture perfectly composed. There was no panic in her face, no guilt, no fear, just quiet certainty. Natalie stood beside her, pale but rigid, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. "You're lying," Seth said. "No," Dolores replied. "We managed appearances carefully. Children are easy to excuse. Illness, homeschooling days, staying with friends. People believe what they're told." Seth's stomach lurched violently. He looked down at Robbie, at his thin arms, the dirt embedded under his fingernails, the hollow look in his eyes. 3 months. 3 months trapped in a wall. Rage surged up his spine like fire. "You put my son in a wall," he said, his voice shaking with fury. "You tied him up like an animal." Dolores tilted her head slightly. "He wasn't behaving," she said. The casual tone nearly made Seth black out. "He's 7, Seth shouted. "And that's exactly why correction is necessary," she replied. Seth stared at her, disbelief crashing into anger. "You're insane." Dolores didn't react. Instead, she gestured toward the hole in the wall. "The others were more difficult," she said. A cold dread slid through Seth's chest. "The skeletons," he whispered. "Yes." Her expression didn't change. "They were my twins, Sarah and Samuel." The names hung in the air like ghosts. Seth's brain stumbled, trying to connect the pieces. "You're saying," he swallowed hard, "you're saying those are your children?" "Yes." "How did they didn't survive the discipline." The matter-of-fact delivery hit harder than any scream could have. Seth's stomach twisted violently. "You killed them." "No," Dolores said calmly. "They failed to endure." The words made something inside Seth snap. "You locked them in a wall," he roared. Robbie flinched in his arms. Dolores' eyes flicked briefly to the boy, then back to Seth. "Isolation builds resilience," she said, "or it reveals weakness." Seth felt like he was going to vomit. He turned toward Natalie, desperation replacing rage for a moment. "Natalie," he said, his voice breaking, "tell me you didn't know. Tell me this wasn't—" "I knew," she said quietly. The words landed like a gunshot. Seth froze. "What?" Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look ashamed. "I knew," she repeated. "Mom explained everything. It's how I was raised." Seth's heart pounded violently. "You helped," he whispered. Natalie hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." The room tilted. Seth struggled to breathe. "You helped," he repeated slowly, as if saying the words might make them less real. "We were going to take him out today," Natalie said quickly. "That was the plan. You weren't supposed to be home yet." The sentence hit him with horrifying clarity. "You mean?" His voice dropped to a whisper. "If I hadn't come home early, he would have been fine," she said. "Fine." The word echoed in Seth's head like a scream. Robbie clung tighter to his shirt, trembling. Seth felt something inside his chest fracture. His wife, the woman he loved, the mother of his child, had done this, had allowed this, had participated. He looked at her like he'd never seen her before. "Why?" he asked, his voice raw. Natalie swallowed. "Because he needed to learn," she said. Seth blinked. "Learn what?" "Respect. Obedience. Gratitude." Her voice steadied as she spoke, conviction replacing hesitation. "Children don't understand how good they have it unless they experience deprivation." Seth stared at her in horror. "You tortured him." "No," she said firmly. Dolores placed a reassuring hand on Natalie's shoulder. "It's discipline," Dolores said. Natalie nodded, her jaw tightening as if gathering courage. "Yes," she said, "discipline." Chapter 5, The Philosophy of Monsters. For a long moment after Natalie said the word, Seth couldn't move. Discipline. The word echoed in his head, colliding violently with the image of Robbie tied inside a wall. His arms tightened instinctively around his son. Robbie buried his face in his Seth's chest, trembling, his breath coming in small, uneven bursts. Seth could feel every rib through the thin fabric of his shirt. That alone nearly shattered him again. But something else began to creep into his awareness. Dolores and Natalie weren't acting afraid. They weren't panicking. They weren't begging him to understand, or apologizing, or trying to explain it away as a mistake. They were calm, certain. as if they genuinely believed nothing wrong had happened. That realization scared him more than anything else so far. "You think this is normal," Seth said slowly, his voice rough. "You actually think this is okay?" Dolores met his gaze without hesitation. "Yes," she said. The simplicity of the answer sent a chill down his spine. "You don't get obedience from kindness," she continued. "You get weakness, entitlement, disrespect." Seth stared at her in disbelief. "He's a child," Seth said. "He's supposed to make mistakes. That's how kids learn." "No," Dolores replied. "That's how children become uncontrollable." Natalie nodded beside her, arms still wrapped tightly around herself, but her expression had shifted. There was fear there, but not fear of guilt or consequences. Fear of Seth's reaction. Fear that he might not understand. "You don't see it," Natalie said quietly. "That's the problem." Seth blinked. "The problem?" "Yes," she said, her voice gaining strength. "You've always been too soft with him. Let him talk back. Letting him question things. Letting him think he has choices." "He does have choices," Seth said incredulously. "He's a person. He's a child," Dolores corrected. "Children are not equals. They are raw material. You shape them, or the world does." The words made Seth's stomach twist. Dolores stepped closer, her tone almost patient now, like she was explaining a lesson to someone slow to grasp it. "Isolation creates perspective," she said. "When a child experiences darkness, silence, hunger, they learn what matters. They learn gratitude. They learn obedience." Seth's pulse pounded in his ears. "That's torture. It's conditioning." Robbie whimpered softly in Seth's arms. Seth rubbed his back gently, whispering, "It's okay, buddy. I've got you." But his eyes never left Dolores. "You said you raised Natalie this way," Seth said. "You did this to her." "Yes." Natalie didn't react with anger or resentment. Instead, she nodded slightly. "It worked," she said. Seth felt like the floor had disappeared beneath him. "You're serious," he whispered. Dolores continued, her voice steady. "Natalie was strong. She endured. She learned respect early. Structure. Discipline. She became successful because of it." "You locked her in a wall?" Seth asked, horrified. "Not exactly the same," Dolores said, "but similar principles. Isolation rooms. Sensory deprivation. Restriction." Seth's mind reeled. "And Stuart?" he asked, the name coming out before he could stop it. "You said you had a son." Dolores' expression flickered briefly. "Yes, Stuart. What about him?" "He survived," she said simply. The word survived landed heavily. "What does that mean?" Seth pressed. "It means he learned," she replied. Natalie's jaw tightened slightly, and Seth caught a glimpse of something else there, resentment. "He was weaker," she said. "He complained more, resisted more." Dolores nodded faintly, but eventually he understood. Seth's breathing grew shallow. "You're talking about this like it's training a dog," he said. "It's raising a human," Dolores corrected. Silence filled the room again. Seth's thoughts raced. These weren't people who thought they'd made a mistake. These weren't people who felt guilty. They believed they were right. Completely. Utterly. And that realization triggered a new fear, one colder and sharper than the horror he'd felt before. Because if they believed they were right, then they wouldn't stop. Natalie stepped closer, her voice softer now. "We weren't going to hurt him permanently," she said. "We monitored him, fed him, gave him water. This was temporary." 3 months, Seth said. She hesitated. "He needed more time than we expected." Robbie flinched again in Seth's arms. Seth's hands clenched into fists against his son's back. Dolores spoke again. "Fear builds loyalty," she said. "When the child realizes the parent controls safety, the bond becomes unbreakable." Seth stared at her. "You're monsters," he said quietly. Dolores didn't react. Instead, she studied him. And in that moment, Seth understood something that made his blood run cold. They weren't afraid of him. Not even now. Not after he'd found Robbie. Not after he'd seen the skeletons. They were watching him, evaluating him, like he was the unpredictable variable in their system. A problem to solve. And suddenly, Seth realized something with absolute clarity. He and Robbie were not safe. Seth understands he and Robbie are in danger. Chapter 6, Immediate Threat. The realization hit Seth with the force of a physical blow. He and Robbie were not safe. Not emotionally. Not physically. Not at all. Every instinct in his body shifted at once, from confusion and horror into something primal and focused. Protect. Escape. Survive. His eyes flicked toward the doorway behind Natalie and Dolores. The hallway. The stairs. The front door. Distance suddenly felt enormous. Too far. Robbie clung to him, weak and shaking, his small fingers digging into Seth's shirt like he was afraid Seth might disappear if he let go. "It's okay," Seth whispered softly into his son's hair. "I've got you." But his mind was racing. Police. He needed police. Now. Slowly, carefully, he adjusted Robbie's weight in his arms with one hand and reached into his pocket with the other. His phone. His fingers wrapped around it, pulling it free. Natalie noticed immediately. Her eyes widened. "Seth," he hit the screen, thumb moving toward the emergency call icon. "We're done talking," he said, voice low and shaking with rage. "I'm calling the police." He never finished the motion. Natalie lunged forward. Her hand slammed into his wrist, knocking the phone out of his grip. It hit the floor with a sharp crack and skidded across the hardwood. "What are you doing?" she shouted. Seth stared at her, stunned, not because she'd stopped him, but because of the panic in her voice. Not guilt, not regret, fear of consequences. "You put our son in a wall," he said, his voice breaking with disbelief. "You think I'm not calling the police?" "It's not what you think," she said desperately. "It's exactly what I think." Behind her, Dolores moved. Seth saw it in his peripheral vision, a small, deliberate motion. He turned his head. Dolores held something in her hand. A syringe. Clear barrel. Thin needle. Liquid inside. For a split second, Seth's brain couldn't process it. Then everything inside him detonated. "What is that?" he demanded. Dolores didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stepped forward calmly, her expression almost soothing. "You're very upset," she said gently. "Your fever is high. You're not thinking clearly." A cold spike of fear shot through Seth's chest. "Stay back," he said, tightening his grip on Robbie. Natalie's voice came quickly. "Mom, it's only a sedative," Dolores said. "He needs to calm down. We can talk once he's rested." Sedative. The word echoed in Seth's skull like an alarm siren. They weren't trying to calm him. They were trying to control him. Every survival instinct he had roared to life. Fight. Run. Do something. His muscles tensed automatically, adrenaline flooding his bloodstream so fast it made him dizzy. He could try to push past them. He could run for the stairs. But Robbie was weak, barely able to hold himself upright. If Seth dropped him, if Dolores stuck him with that needle, the scenario played out in Seth's mind in terrifying clarity. He couldn't risk it, not with Robbie in his arms. Dolores stepped closer. "Natalie," she said calmly, "help me hold him still." Natalie hesitated. Fear flashed across her face. But then she moved toward him, and something inside Seth shifted again. Cold, sharp, strategic. Fighting right now would get him nowhere. He needed time. He needed them to relax. He needed them to believe he wasn't a threat. The decision happened in less than a second. His body language changed. His shoulders dropped slightly. His breathing slowed. "Wait," Seth said. Dolores paused. Natalie stopped mid-step. Seth swallowed hard, forcing his voice to sound unsteady but not aggressive. "Just wait," he said again. "Okay." Dolores studied him carefully. "What?" she asked. Seth looked down at Robbie, then back at them. I'm not thinking straight," he said, letting his voice tremble. "This is a lot. I just found him in a wall. Anyone would lose it." Natalie's expression shifted, hope flickering behind her fear. Seth forced himself to continue. "I don't want to destroy our family," he said quietly. Dolores' eyes narrowed slightly. "What are you saying?" she asked. "I'm saying," Seth took a shaky breath. "Maybe I overreacted. Maybe I don't understand what you were trying to do." Natalie blinked. "You mean that?" she asked cautiously. Seth nodded slowly. "You said this is how you were raised," he said, looking at her. "And you turned out okay." Natalie's shoulders relaxed a fraction. "Yes," she said softly. "I did." Seth turned toward Dolores. "And you obviously believe in it," he added. Strongly. Dolores watched him, analyzing every word. "Yes," she said. Seth lowered his gaze slightly, playing the role. I need to understand, he said. If this is something you both believe is right, then I need to hear it. I need to know why. Silence filled the room. Natalie looked at her mother. Dolores looked back at Seth. Then, slowly, Dolores lowered the syringe. We can explain, she said. Natalie exhaled in visible relief. Seth nodded weakly, like a man overwhelmed but willing to listen. Inside, his thoughts were razor sharp. They were dangerous. They had already proven they could imprison a child for months. They had skeletons in their walls, and they were willing to drug him to maintain control. There was no fixing this, no reasoning, no reconciliation, only one outcome. As he held Robbie closer, Seth made a decision with absolute certainty. He will destroy them. Chapter 7. Father and Son. Night fell slowly, like a curtain lowering over the house. The bedroom lights stayed on. Every light stayed on. Seth hadn't realized how dark the house normally felt at night until he saw the way Robbie reacted to shadows. Even the faint dimness in the corners of the room made the boy tense, his small body going rigid in Seth's arms. It's okay, Seth whispered for the 100th time that evening. You're safe. I'm right here. Robbie didn't answer. He hadn't said much since earlier. Shock had settled over him like a heavy blanket. His movements were slow, cautious, almost mechanical. When Seth tried to set him down on the bed to examine his wrists and ankles, Robbie panicked immediately, clinging tighter. No, Robbie whispered hoarsely. Don't let go. I won't, Seth said quickly. I won't. I promise. So he sat on the bed with Robbie in his lap instead. He'd wrapped his son in a clean blanket after gently wiping the dirt from his skin with warm water and a washcloth. The marks from the zip ties were angry red bands around his wrists and ankles. Bruises covered his arms. His ribs were too visible beneath his skin. Every injury felt like a knife twisting inside Seth's chest. Downstairs, he could occasionally hear muffled movement, Natalie and Dolores talking quietly. Planning. The sound made his jaw tighten, but he pushed it aside. Right now, only Robbie mattered. You hungry? Seth asked softly. Robbie hesitated, then nodded once. Seth reached for the tray he'd brought upstairs earlier, crackers, applesauce, a glass of water. Nothing heavy. He didn't know when Robbie had last eaten normally. Slow, Seth said gently, handing him a spoon. You don't have to rush. Robbie's hands shook as he ate, but he kept going, like his body didn't trust the food would still be there later. Seth watched him carefully, forcing himself to stay calm even as rage simmered beneath his skin. After a few minutes, Robbie leaned back against him again, exhausted. Daddy, he whispered. Yeah, buddy. Are they mad? The question hit Seth hard. No, he said immediately. No one's mad at you. Robbie's fingers twisted in the blanket. I tried to be good, he said, voice trembling. I really did. I didn't talk. I didn't cry loud. I stayed quiet. Seth's throat closed. Oh, Robbie, he whispered, pulling him closer. You didn't do anything wrong. None of this is your fault. Not even a little. They said. Robbie swallowed. They said if I learned, I could come out. A cold wave of anger surged through Seth. They were wrong, he said firmly. They should never have put you there. Ever. Robbie was silent for a moment. Then, very quietly, it was so dark. Seth felt his chest tighten. I know, he said. I couldn't see anything. Robbie continued, voice shaking. Sometimes I thought, maybe I went blind. You didn't, Seth said softly. I talked to you, Robbie whispered. Seth blinked. What? In my head, Robbie said. I pretended you were there. I told you stuff. Seth's vision blurred with tears. What kind of stuff? He asked gently. Robbie shrugged weakly. Just things like when I was scared, or when I was hungry, or when I heard noises. Noises? Robbie nodded against his chest. Sometimes I heard scratching, he said. Seth froze, but he forced himself to stay calm. It's okay, he said. You don't have to think about that right now. Robbie's body trembled again. I don't want to go back, he whispered. You won't, Seth said immediately. What if they make me? They won't. What if you're not here? The fear in the question was raw and deep. Seth cupped Robbie's face gently, forcing him to look up. Listen to me, he said, his voice low but steady. I'm not going anywhere. I'm right here. And nobody is ever putting you back in that wall again. Robbie searched his face, eyes glossy with tears. Promise? He asked. Seth didn't hesitate. I promise. Robbie leaned forward, burying his face in Seth's chest again, his small body shaking with quiet sobs. Seth wrapped his arms around him tightly, rocking slightly back and forth. Minutes passed, maybe longer. Eventually Robbie's breathing slowed, exhaustion pulling him towards sleep. But every time his eyes started to close, he jerked awake again, panicked. The lights, he whispered. Don't turn off the lights. They're staying on, Seth assured him. All night. You stay too. I'm right here. Robbie finally relaxed enough to rest his head on Seth's shoulder. As Seth held him, something inside him changed. Earlier, his emotions had been chaos, shock, horror, rage, disbelief. Now they began to settle, not into peace, into something colder, clearer, focused. He looked down at his son, the fragile trust in Robbie's grip, the fear still lingering in his eyes, even as sleep pulled him under. And Seth felt the rage inside him transform. Not explosive, not reckless, controlled, precise. They had hurt his child. They had imprisoned him. They had nearly destroyed him. And they believed they were right. That meant this wasn't over. This was only the beginning. Seth pressed his lips gently to Robbie's hair. I will never let them put you back in there again, he whispered. Chapter 8. Gathering Evidence. Seth didn't sleep. He stayed sitting upright against the headboard most of the night, Robbie curled against his side under the blanket, one small hand gripping Seth's shirt like an anchor. Every time Robbie stirred, Seth whispered reassurances until the boy settled again. But Seth's mind never stopped moving. Shock had burned away. Fear had sharpened into focus. Now there was only one path forward. Strategy. If he called the police immediately, Natalie and Dolores would deny everything. They'd claim Seth was delusional from fever. They'd say Robbie had been missing for days, and Seth had overreacted. They might even accuse him. Without proof, the situation could spiral into chaos, child services, custody battles, legal confusion. And worst of all, Robbie might end up alone with him again. That could never happen. So Seth waited until just before dawn, when the house was silent and still, and carefully slid out from under Robbie's grip. I'll be right back, he whispered. Robbie stirred slightly. Don't go, I'm just right here, Seth said softly, touching his hair. You're safe. Robbie nodded weakly and drifted back into sleep. Seth stood slowly, grabbed his phone from the nightstand, and stepped into the hallway. The broken wall still gaped open across the room like a wound. Even in the dim light, he could see the interior cavity and the shapes inside. His stomach tightened, but he forced himself to move closer. This was necessary. He opened the camera app. His hands were steady now, cold, focused. First, he photographed the hole in the wall from multiple angles. Wide shots, close shots, the studs, the insulation, the depth of the cavity. Then he crouched and took photos inside. The zip ties still attached to the wood, the scraps of cloth, the dark stains, and finally, the skeletons. He swallowed hard as he zoomed in. Small bones, tiny skulls, years of dust. He took several pictures, making sure every detail was clear. Evidence, proof that couldn't be explained away. When he finished, he stepped back and exhaled slowly. Next came the restraints. He collected the broken zip ties from the floor and photographed them against the hardwood for clarity. Then he returned to the bed. Robbie was still asleep, breathing shallow but steady. Seth hesitated. Photographing his injuries felt invasive, but it was necessary. Carefully, gently, he pulled back the blanket just enough to expose Robbie's wrists. Red welts, bruising, indentations where plastic had dug into skin for weeks. Seth's jaw tightened. I'm sorry, he whispered, though Robbie couldn't hear him. He took photos. Wrists, ankles, bruises on arms, ribs visible under skin. Then he covered Robbie again, tucking the blanket around him protectively. Next step, Dolores' notebooks. He'd seen them before, small journals she carried around, always writing things down. Schedules, notes, observations. At the time, he'd assumed it was harmless. Now he knew better. He slipped out of the bedroom and moved quietly down the hallway. The guest room door, The room Dolores used was slightly open. He listened. No movement inside. He pushed it open slowly. The room smelled faintly of lavender and something medicinal. On the bedside table sat a stack of notebooks. Exactly where he expected. He picked them up carefully and flipped through. His stomach twisted. Dates, times, behavior logs, entries like Day 12, resistance decreased after 4 hours darkness. Day 27, crying reduced. Hydration adequate. Day 61, subject compliant when released briefly. Subject, not Robbie. Subject, rage flared again, but he pushed it down. Photos first, emotion later. He photographed every page methodically, ensuring timestamps and handwriting were clear. When he finished, he returned the notebooks exactly where he'd found them. Back in the hallway, he closed the door silently. His pulse was steady, controlled. Next, legal protection. He went downstairs into the kitchen and opened his laptop. Search bar, recording laws in his state. He read carefully. One-party consent. That meant he could legally record conversations he was part of without telling the others. Good. Very good. Confessions would be admissible. He opened a new email and began typing. First message. A family attorney he'd used years ago for a property issue. Subject. Urgent. Need immediate consultation. He explained briefly child abuse, physical confinement, evidence collected. He requested a call as soon as possible. Second message. A private investigator recommended by a coworker months earlier. Similar details. Request for discretion. Then he opened a third email. This one took longer. 2. Stuart Reed. Dolores' son. Seth had only met him twice in the entire marriage. Stuart had always kept his distance, rarely visiting, polite but reserved. At the time, Seth assumed family dynamics. Now he wondered what Stuart had survived. He typed carefully. I believe your mother abused you as a child. I need to know if that's true. Robbie was found confined inside a wall tonight. There were remains of 2 children. Please respond urgently. He hesitated before hitting send, then clicked. Minutes passed. He stared at the screen. Then, inbox notification. Reply. His heart pounded as he opened it. The message was short. Yes, she did. Isolation, restraints, punishment rooms. The twins died during one of her lessons. I tried to tell people when I was young. No one believed me. Call me immediately. Seth leaned back in his chair, a slow breath leaving his lungs. Confirmation, corroboration, witness testimony. The pieces were coming together. For the first time since he'd smashed the wall open, he felt something shift inside him. Not relief. Momentum. The path forward was becoming clear. And justice no longer felt impossible. Momentum builds toward justice. Chapter 9. Preparing the trap. The house was quiet again, but the tension was suffocating. Seth moved slowly, deliberately, every step calculated. He had Robbie asleep in his room, the boy's fragile chest rising and falling under the blanket, and he could hear Natalie and Dolores downstairs, whispering to each other like conspirators. Seth's hands shook slightly, not from fear this time, but from adrenaline, the kind that sharpened his senses and focused his thoughts. Every movement, every glance, every sound mattered. He had seen the horror. He had touched the evidence. He had felt the weight of the crime in his arms with Robbie. And now, he had to act like nothing had changed. Robbie's sleeping. Don't worry, he whispered to himself, closing the bedroom door softly. He leaned against it for a moment, taking slow breaths, centering himself. This wasn't just about anger anymore. This was about strategy, control, and survival. Downstairs, the soft clinking of dishes reminded him of the normalcy they wanted to project, a mask over the monster that lurked beneath the family surface. He walked quietly to the living room, making sure his movements seemed casual, unremarkable. Natalie was seated on the couch, her hands folded tightly in her lap, eyes flicking up whenever she thought he might look at her. Dolores stood by the window, her posture unnaturally straight, observing him. Seth cleared his throat. I've been thinking, he said slowly, about everything you've told me, about discipline. Natalie's eyes widened slightly, hope flickering behind the thin mask of fear. Dolores tilted her head, listening intently. I want to understand it better, Seth continued, his tone calm, measured. I want to know how you think. How? You raise children. I need to understand, so I can keep our family together. There it was, the bait. And it worked. Both women visibly relaxed, shoulders dropping slightly, tension leaving their faces in small increments. Natalie exhaled softly. Dolores gave a small, approving nod, as if Seth had just shown insight she'd been waiting for. You really mean that? Natalie asked, her voice tentative but hopeful. I do, Seth replied, nodding slowly. I want to understand fully. I want to see it from your perspective. The room's energy shifted. The predators had been baited. They believed he was coming around. They believed he was compliant. They believed he trusted them. Inside, Seth's mind raced with the next steps. He had to prepare. He had to make sure that when the time came, he had every advantage, every piece of evidence, and every safeguard in place. He moved to the small office in the corner of the living room. Laptops, tablets, cameras, everything he could use to capture the conversation had to be ready. He had already researched the laws, confirming that one-party consent would make recorded confessions admissible. Now it was time to implement. He pulled out a small digital recorder, a tiny device no bigger than a pen. He clicked it on, tested the battery, then placed it carefully on the shelf across the room, angled toward the couch where Natalie usually sat. Then he set a second device closer to Dolores' usual spot by the window. The devices were small, discreet, and positioned to capture every word, every pause, every nuance. Seth moved quietly, checking lines of sight, ensuring the devices wouldn't be accidentally discovered. He even adjusted the living room lamps, ensuring the right lighting for the cameras without making the setup obvious. Next, he pulled out a USB drive from his pocket and copied all the photos, videos, and scanned documents he had gathered. Images of the wall cavity, Robbie's injuries, the zip ties, Dolores' journals, skeleton photos. He duplicated them onto 2 more drives, storing one in a locked drawer in the office and another tucked discreetly in his jacket pocket. Backup, redundancy, survival. He could not risk a single piece of evidence disappearing. Not now. Not ever. Seth took a deep breath, thinking about the dinner. He would invite them both, Dolores and Natalie, to a casual family discussion over a meal. He would frame it as an opportunity to share perspectives, to reconcile the ideology with his love for the family. He would use it to gather confessions, capture admissions, and ensure that every word was recorded. And he would remain calm, emotionless on the surface, but lethal beneath it. He moved to the kitchen quietly, checking the layout, considering logistics. Chairs positioned for ease of conversation, camera angles accounted for. Even the table settings had to look normal. They had to believe this was just another family dinner. Dolores' voice floated up from the hallway. Seth, are you all right? You've been quiet since before dinner. Seth smiled faintly, the mask sliding comfortably onto his face. I'm fine. Just thinking about how to make this work better for everyone. Natalie's footsteps approached. She paused beside him. You really want to understand? He looked at her, eyes soft but calculating. I do. I really do. A flicker of relief passed over her face. Seth noted it carefully, fear replaced by hope, trust beginning to return. Exactly as planned. The kitchen now felt like a war room. Maps of mental notes in his head. Camera positions, question sequences, timing, potential reactions. Every what if he could imagine had a countermeasure ready. He returned to the living room. From the corner of his eye, he saw Robbie sleeping soundly upstairs. That image alone made every decision sharpen. This wasn't just about justice anymore. This was about protection, preservation, survival. Seth walked slowly among them, a predator walking among predators. He smiled softly, careful, reassuring. He nodded to Dolores, then Natalie. He allowed himself to appear relaxed, even deferential. Inside, every muscle was coiled, every thought measured, every potential threat accounted for. He was calm, strategic, patient, and lethal in his focus. He had the evidence, he had the tools, and he had a plan. They thought they controlled the house. They thought they controlled him. But Seth was ready. He would use their confidence against them. Every word, every gesture, every step. The family dinner was set. The trap was ready. And for the first time since discovering Robbie, Seth allowed himself a small, cold smile. He was walking among predators. Chapter 10, The Dinner Begins. The dining room was quiet, but tense, like a forest before a storm. Seth had set the table carefully. Plates arranged neatly, silverware aligned precisely, glasses filled with water. The room smelled faintly of rosemary from the roast he had insisted on preparing himself. It was a normal, mundane scene, except it wasn't. At one end of the table, Natalie sat, her posture rigid yet relaxed, convinced she had won his trust. At the other end, Dolores straightened her back, a faint smile on her lips, watching him with a predatory calm that only sharpened Seth's awareness. Seth positioned himself at the head of the table, Robbie asleep upstairs, the house eerily still aside from the soft clinking of cutlery as Natalie poured him a glass of water. He had made sure the recorder was discreetly hidden under the centerpiece, angled perfectly. A second device was in the corner, capturing audio and video from the other side. Every angle covered, every word preserved. He inhaled slowly, forcing his voice to a calm, almost casual tone. "Thank you for agreeing to dinner," he said, smiling faintly. "I want to understand more about your approach, about how you've been raising Robbie." Natalie's shoulders relaxed slightly, a small, hopeful smile forming. Dolores nodded, a faint glint of approval in her eyes. Seth allowed himself to appear tentative, as though he were opening up to learn, not to judge. "You've both explained some before," he continued, "but I want to hear it fully, step by step, how everything works." Dolores tilted her head slightly, considering him, as if evaluating whether he truly understood. "You're serious about this?" she asked. "Yes," Seth said softly. "I want to understand. I need to, for the family." Natalie exhaled, tension easing from her body. I think he's trying to see it our way," she whispered to Dolores. Dolores' smile widened just slightly. "Good. Understanding is the first step." Seth nodded, hiding the tightness in his jaw. Every second they felt confident, every second they believed he was compliant, was a second closer to capturing the truth. He started with gentle, open-ended questions, careful to appear curious, not accusatory. "So what's the goal of all these methods?" he asked, leaning forward slightly. Dolores' eyes lit up. "Control," she said simply. "Structure. Obedience." "Obedience," Seth repeated softly, letting the word linger, making it sound like a realization. "Yes," she said. "A child must understand limits, rules, consequences. Otherwise, chaos reigns." Natalie nodded in agreement. "We've always believed structure is love. If you don't guide them firmly, they don't learn to respect it." Seth's fingers tightened around his glass. He let them speak, let them explain. Every word was proof, every syllable a confirmation of what he had already documented. "And the wall?" he asked gently. "The confinement?" Dolores' smile didn't waver. "Necessary. Isolation builds perspective. Children need to face fear. Only then do they appreciate safety. Only then do they learn gratitude." Seth nodded slowly. "I see. And how do you determine when it's enough?" "When they've learned." Natalie chimed in this time, her voice steady. "You observe. You record behavior. You measure progress. You allow brief release, sometimes. The child is never forgotten. They are monitored constantly." Seth leaned back, feigning contemplation. "That seems intense." Dolores tilted her head, regarding him. "Intensity is necessary. Without intensity, nothing is learned. The lesson fails." Seth smiled slightly, a careful, neutral smile, masking the rage burning inside him. He was calm, calculated, collecting every nuance, every pause, every justification. "And Robbie," he said softly, "he's only 7. How do you know he's ready for such lessons?" Natalie answered immediately, without hesitation. "He's a smart boy, observant, curious. He needed to understand boundaries, just as I did." Dolores added, almost as if sharing a proud secret. "I raised Natalie this way. She became strong, capable, successful. It works. It always works when done correctly." Seth's pulse quickened, but his voice remained calm. And Stuart? Your other son? Dolores' eyes flickered, but her expression stayed neutral. Stuart survived. He was compliant enough, learned enough to endure. Lessons differ for each child. Some require more, some less. And the twins, Seth asked, voice quiet now, forcing it to sound curious rather than accusatory. What happened to them? Dolores' smile tightened. It didn't endure. Sometimes the process claims its own. It is regrettable, but instructive. A lesson, even in failure, teaches what must be done differently next time. Seth's stomach twisted. He forced his voice to remain measured. So you've learned from past mistakes, adjusted methods accordingly? Exactly, Dolores said. Her tone was matter-of-fact, confident, unshakable. Mistakes are part of the process. Observation, documentation, refinement. That's the core of discipline. Seth allowed a small, thoughtful nod. I see. So it's methodical. Yes, she said. Science and structure combined with courage. Courage to follow through. Courage to do what must be done for the child's ultimate growth. Natalie leaned forward, earnest. It's hard to explain to people who haven't experienced it. They see cruelty where there is care. They see abuse where there is instruction. But it's love. Real love. Firm love. Seth let the words sink in, feigning comprehension. He even asked soft, clarifying questions, guiding them gently. And you monitor every response, every reaction? Dolores' eyes sparkled with satisfaction. Of course, observation is everything. Every sound, every movement, every hesitation. Data, evidence. That's how we know the child is learning. Seth smiled slightly, carefully neutral. I understand. You're thorough. You document everything. And it works? Yes, Dolores said softly. It works. Always. Natalie added, her voice calm and unwavering. It may seem extreme, but it's for the child, for the family, for their future. Seth let them continue, asking questions that encouraged elaboration. Every word they spoke, every detail they revealed, was being captured, stored, and secured. Every sentence was a confession. Dolores began leaning forward slightly, the excitement in her voice more pronounced. The key is isolation and observation combined with controlled release. Hunger, discomfort, fear they teach. Each child reacts differently. You measure, you record, you adjust. And eventually, compliance becomes instinctive. Respect becomes habitual. Seth listened, nodding slowly, concealing the cold determination building inside him. He allowed the rhythm to continue, letting them detail the ideology that had trapped his son and claimed the lives of others. And as Dolores spoke, as Natalie reinforced every point with quiet certainty, Seth's mind worked faster than ever. He cataloged, cross-referenced, stored each phrase, each pause, each rationalization. Every justification for cruelty became evidence of intent, of malice, of ideology. He took a slow, deliberate sip of water, his eyes steady, calm, yet beneath that surface, the storm had formed. Seth watched them speak, knowing this is the beginning of the end.